You ever notice how there's just some people we meet and we instantly like them? Likewise, the opposite is true. Why is that? Is it because we have sort of similar personalities, or is it physical looks? Does it have something to do with some brainwave matching thing going on? Well, for at least 30 some years, I've been studying some of this. Why do people trust and like people? And why do they distrust and don't like them? And why does it happen so quickly? Let's talk about it today at the Water Cooler Hangout. Hi, this is Bob Poole. Welcome to the Water Cooler Hangout. For over 40 years, I've been helping people like you grow and prosper. Please join me and my guest as we share real-life stories about sales, marketing, creativity, and leadership. Need help in moving to the next level? Find out how others have done it by listening to the Water Cooler Hangout. You know, there's an old saying that you can't please all the people all the time. Well, that might not be true. At least you can probably try to please all the people all the time, especially if you're in sales or if you just want to communicate with them. I want to talk about the concept of behavioral types. Throughout history, people have attempted to explain the difference in people. The earliest recorded efforts that I could find anyways was in astrology, where it was believed that the alignment of the heavens influences the formation of behavior. We've all, played with horoscopes probably over our lifetime. There were the 12 signs and 4 groupings symbolized by earth, air, fire, and water. So you might even know if you're an air sign or earth sign, etc. Then after that, Hippocrates came out with his concept of what was called the Four Temperaments. They were choleric, phlegmatic, sanguine, and melancholy. In 1923, Dr. Carl Jung wrote the book Psychological Types and described the intuitor, thinker, feeler, and sensor. His was the most sophisticated scientific work done at that time. So anyways, it seems like all these styles and personalities that I've studied and read about over the years agree on one thing, and that is that they come up with 4 basic groups. Sometimes there's blended groups. So, for instance, if you were a style, let's call you a director, you may also have another type of personality style that you exhibit that maybe we would call a talker. And you could blend those together sometimes. Very few people are all one style, although I've met a few, without a doubt. Over the years, I've conducted a lot of workshops on just this topic, and we actually go through determining what style the people are in the workshop, and they self-assess themselves, but we have pretty good assessment instruments these days. And they come up with what their styles are, what's the more dominant style, and almost all of them are blended. But every once in a while, you get someone who is just almost all of one style. It's kind of interesting. So anyways, knowledge advanced, and there's probably maybe more than a dozen concepts out there on behavioral differences. But again, they all have that one thread of the 4 styles grouping. Some brain researchers I know have said that they tell us that the left and right sides of the brain, have a cerebral hemisphere and a limbic hemisphere with its own spatial function. And they say that we tend to develop some brain parts more than we develop others. And this predisposes us towards certain predictable patterns of behavior. That's the brain people. Other people, more the psychologists and personality kind of people, they have a different take on it. They say that it's all about patterns. In other words, you're a child and you kind of form a personality by trial and error. So we try a behavior like being outgoing. And if that gets us the kind of response that we're looking for, we do it again. Think of children, Children, throw a little temper tantrum, and if they get what they want, you can expect more temper tantrums, right? So personality is kind of formed that way, according to these guys. So anyways, you do it again, you get the same kind of response. You'll try it a third time, and after a while, this forms a behavioral pattern. And that pattern leads to a habit, and that habit pretty much makes you predictable. And that's one thing about people that's fairly certain, and that's that they're fairly predictable. Once you understand a person, you probably will understand their probable response, the reaction to a given set of stimuli. When it comes to sales or communication of any type, the fact of the matter is that people, do business with people they like and trust. All things being equal, people will do business, will spend time with, will affiliate with, will help people that they like and trust. Why? Well, it's human nature that we want to know that when something goes wrong, that we can come to you for help. We only seek out help or appear vulnerable to those we know, like, and trust. I'll say that again. We really only seek help or appear vulnerable to those we know, like, and trust. And that's why we often buy from friends of friends. And, it's a funny story, too, because I've had people tell me how they've been on, a plane trip, and they're flying, coast to coast or something, and they've got a seatmate. And halfway through the trip, the person sitting next to them starts telling them all kinds of personal details about their lives, sharing things. And they were like, how does that happen? Well, they formed a bond. How long does it take before you know you like someone? Not very long at all. How long before you can trust them? Not too long. Now, they can prove you wrong, of course, and break that trust. But many people are open, certain personality styles especially, are open to trusting people immediately. They're kind of all in. Other people have that, we'll see what happens. We'll weigh this out. But that's why a stranger might tell someone, intimate details of their life on a plane, because they just happen to be those personality styles that can do that with each other. And they are able to appear vulnerable to them because they already like and trust them. From a business standpoint, we know it's safe to buy from people that we like and trust because we figure we won't be scammed or cheated or lied to. However, in most of our interactions with people, the fact is we can't pick or choose the type of person we're most likely to trust and like right away. So we need to learn how to effectively communicate with everyone's personality style. So how do you do that? So over the years, I've heard these four styles given different names. But for today's podcast, let's call them driver, expressive, amiable, and analytic. That kind of describes their personality styles. Back in 1928, Dr. William Moulton Marston, he was probably one of the first psychologists, I guess, in the world. He was at Harvard. And he proposed something that he called the DISC theory, D-I-S-C, and came up with an instrument for assessing styles. So a DISC, by the way, stands for dominance is the D, which relates to control, power, and assertiveness. The I is influence, which relates to social situations and communication. S stands for steadiness, and that's submission in his time, actually, he called it, but it was changed to steadiness, which relates to patience and persistence and thoughtfulness. And the C stands for compliance, relating to structure and organization. So I mentioned to you that I give them names, or the names that I like are driver, which is the dominance, expressive, which is the influence, amiable, which is steadiness, and analytic, which is compliance. Now, if you're playing along at home and want to get a visual representation of this, draw just 2 lines. Draw a vertical line, horizontal line, and so that you have 4 equal quadrants. In the upper left quadrant, put that D, And next to that, put the I. Upper right would be I. Then the lower right would be the S, and the lower left would be the C. So DISC, like a clock starting in the upper left. And I'll tell you why. We might take a look at that a little bit later, why it's important. Let's talk about the golden rule for a second. Everyone has a golden rule of some sort. You know, he that has the gold rules is one. But I'm talking about do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the golden rule seems to suggest that if you treat others the same way you'd like to be treated, you'll be fulfilling the spirit and the letter of one of the most basic laws of human interaction, right? And that would work pretty well, very well, in fact, if everyone was the same. But we already know that people are different. So if you would practice the golden rule literally, you're likely to have problems and to get into trouble. If you treat people only from your perspective, you're going to turn many of them away or just plain off. My recommendation is that you practice the spirit of the golden rule. So do unto others as they want to be done unto. Let's call it that. In other words, treat people treat people the way they want to be treated. So modify your approach to suit their needs. When you treat people from your perspective, the probable result is an increase in relationship tension. And when tension goes up, trust and cooperation and productivity go down. So practice the spirit of the golden rule. Do unto others as they want to be done unto. Now, one of the first and best examples of using the spirit of the golden rule, maybe we call it the platinum rule, was a guy that I met back in the 80s, in fact. And I was doing some work for a regional CPA firm at the time. And they had just been allowed to start marketing and selling, which for CPAs, most of them thought that was should be illegal still. But they were trying to figure out how to become salespeople. So I was trying to figure out some type of course that could be standardized that they could take to all their offices and learn some basics of selling. So I knew that the typical stuff that was out there was pretty terrible at the time. You know, it was manipulative and it just was not going to fly. It was like, you know, how cars were sold back in the 70s and 80s. So I had a guy that happened to call me, and he said he wanted to talk about a new approach to selling, and he asked for, you know, an appointment. So I said, fine, and I thought, you know, we'll see, who knows. So he met me in my office, and I was actually in Cleveland at the time, and we started talking, and I paid close attention to what he was doing and saying, because this is what I do. I teach people how to sell and market. So before I knew it, I don't know, I think at least a half hour, 45 minutes had gone by, and I don't think we'd said a word about his sales training. He actually had me talking about myself, which isn't that hard to do sometimes. Sometimes I can be more direct and not give people a lot of time. That's just my personality style. But he knew the right questions to ask me to get me talking. I finally said, okay, let's talk about your sales course. And we did. And I ended up buying. And I ended up being a customer for a long time. What he had done was use the actual techniques that he had in the sales course to get me to open up, to get me to like him and trust him. And from then, it was a lot easier for him to sell me on what it was that he had. And it was a good product. It was a very good system, and we used it for years. So let me give you some tips on how you can identify the 4 different styles, and then we'll talk about how you might be able to adjust to communicate with them. And I'm going to talk about it from a selling standpoint, if you were selling a product or a service, but you can also make the transition in your mind here too, if you're just trying to communicate with someone. You know, if you're trying to convince a coworker about something and you want them to be on a certain project or team with you, or just to take a certain action, you're really selling. So think of it that way, okay? So let's start with drivers. That's that D part. So drivers, they want to know what you or the product will do for them. They measure everything by their accomplishments. They're extroverted. They show little emotion, and they're often perceived as being abrupt or controlling. Now, in the world of sports, you might think of someone like Tiger Woods. He is a driver, a high D kind of person. He's often perceived as abrupt or controlling. So you can actually, if you were to look at golf or any kind of sports, you could find examples of all four of these styles at the highest level. So it isn't like one style is better than the other. It's just a matter of certain styles being the way they are, and you need to learn how to communicate with those styles if you want to communicate effectively. So that's the D. So let's talk about that upper right-hand quadrant. That's the I and the DISC. That would be the I, and we call them expressives. So they're driven by emotions. They want to know who else is using or buying your product. They are the talkers. They're the life of the party. They're fun. They're extroverted. And expressives want to be, they want to be unique, understood, and appreciated. They're the huggers. Even in COVID, trust me, they're the huggers. So the bottom right-hand quadrant would be what we call, that's the S, the steadiness, the amiables. So amiables are driven by kindness. They want to know why they should buy your product. They're mostly introverted, and amiables value your suggestions and advice. In the world of car sales, they call them tire kickers. It's a negative term, but basically they just they look and look and look, and they want to check out everything. So they love being part of something, though, and display a lot of emotion. And then finally, the C in the DISC is the analytics. C also could stand for control. They want to know how things work. They're driven by numbers. These are your actuarial type people, and the typical, what you might say a typical accountant might be. They like facts, statistics, details, exact answers. They don't like stories. And they look for you to say something like, oh, yes, everyone loves this. Well, they know everyone doesn't love anything, all things. So they will hold that kind of thing against you. So which style are you? Have you figured it out yet based on what I've told you? You see, when you learn what your preferred dominant style is, that's how you can best interact with others. You can totally change your success rate in sales and just in convincing people to your point of opinion by knowing, one, your own style, and two, being able to pick up on their style. So let's drill down on the personality styles, and I'll give you some tips on how to spot each one of the styles, and also some ideas on how to communicate with them or to sell to them, if you will. So let's start with drivers. Drivers, they're all business. They want facts, not feelings. They expect results. They're concise, they're precise, and they want organized information. They expect you to focus on the task, not chit-chat about the weather. So you don't waste time and you don't argue details with them. They actually don't particularly like details. One of the things that I used to say to drivers was, I'll take care of all the details for you. Their concern is getting the job done. Now, if a driver likes and trusts you, you've got it all right away. They're kind of all in when they like and trust someone. So the worst thing you can do is violate that trust by not doing what you say you're going to do. They, by the way, will purposely ruffle feathers. So they'll test you. Just give them the facts, the options, and the details that they want, and you'll make a sale pretty quickly. They make decisions very quickly. They won't hesitate to show you to the door if you ramble or don't get to the point. Drivers like power, control, respect. They come across as domineering, stubborn, impatient, insensitive, short-tempered. Tell them what you can do and then do it, okay? And they're really nice people too, by the way. So how do you spot a driver? Like I said, they're bottom line, get it done kind of people. So look, if you're in their office or even in their home or even on a Zoom call these days, you can still see what's going on unless they're using a virtual background. But I used to be able to spot them by their office. They have a lot of certificates, awards, photos, and articles, a lot of them about themselves on their walls. They like to have their photo taken with, powerful people, and those photos will be shown. They also are multitaskers, so they're the kind of people that will talk on the phone, sign letters, read email, and all at the same time. From a dress kind of thing, and even dress gets into this, they like strong or solid colors, usually, blacks, ivories, natural colors. They like prestigious things. If I saw someone at a workshop and they were wearing a Rolex watch, I could almost guarantee they were a driver. They love things like limited edition fountain pens. If you can find out what kind of car they drive, if you ask them or see it, they like powerful cars. They like, your Mercedes and BMWs and Bentleys and things like that. Always give them options. If you only give them one option, that takes away their control, and they want to be in control. Make sure you're prepared. They will test your competency with questions before considering what it is you're selling. Present your facts logically, succinctly, and efficiently. Don't stall. Don't expect them to do much listening. They feel in control when they're talking, especially if you can get them to talk about themselves. So show them the big picture and let them be in charge. They want to know what's going to happen, what the results will be. And again, offer to take care of all the details. Drivers hate details. Let's move on now to that second upper right-hand quadrant, the eyes. So these are expressives. Sometimes I call them talkers. So how do you sell or communicate with an expressive? Well, they make some of the best customers, particularly if you happen to be an amiable. They're social, they're warm, they're friendly, they're open to meeting new people, hearing new ideas, looking at your product or service. They're dreamers, they're visionaries. They only make up about 6% of the population. They have a need to be stimulated, challenged, and engaged. They're very much relationship people. So if you want to sell to an expressive, you get excited about the product or service you're selling. If you're not thrilled or passionate about it, then they're going to wonder why they should be. They can come on strong and overwhelming at times, but that's just their nature. They're extroverted. They're just curious. They will talk about, the party they went to last week. They like to talk. They can also come across sometimes as arrogant and egotistical and even manipulative. They like to be appreciated, and they like approval and attention. They want to have a relationship and feel connected to you before they buy from you. One of the things about expressives is they already have someone else they're buying from. It's often difficult to get them to change because they already have a relationship with that person. And one of the worst things for them to do in their heads is to break that relationship, that bond. They're not much on facts and figures. If you appear sold on what it is and you can be enthusiastic about it, they're going to be on board with you. Find out what their dream is and where they see themselves, and show them ways that you can help them achieve that. As far as how to spot an expressive, well, their office, their car, space, whatever is usually a mess. They'll have plants, but they're likely to be dead or near dying. Desks and bookshelves are covered with files, books, and papers. From a clothing standpoint, they wear bright colors. They decorate in bright colors. They like bling. They love to talk, as I've said. There's seemingly a lot of non-related items around, like toys and food and candy and, stuff just lying around that doesn't quite make sense, but they just have a lot of stuff around. They will display things like pictures and stuff like that of themselves, but not nearly as much as the high D will. Often what they will display are gifts or certificates of acknowledgement from other people. That's what you'll see. So how do you sell to them? How do you communicate? Ask them questions about themselves, their families, what they do for recreation, hobbies, what they do on the weekends. Earn their trust by asking them people questions. They usually have a pretty quick verbal pace, and they'll jump from one thing to another, from one topic to another. Build a relationship. Act happy and excited to see or hear from them, because they want to be excited too. They're not very good with details, just like drivers, so you minimize their direct involvement with the details. And let them talk about their ideas and help support their visions and their dreams. One other thing, too, is because they're concerned about making everyone happy, what I found is they're often not put in a position of making a final buying decision. The people that work for them know that they want to make everyone happy, so someone often, their boss, is the actual person making the decision, so you'll have to figure that out. They usually need others to support them in their decisions. All about the relationship. Let's move on to that lower right-hand quadrant, and that is DIS, steadiness. So we call them amiables. So they're amiables are teachers and social workers, firemen, nurses, best friends. They're the ones that keep the wheels of compassion running. As team players, they're totally devoted to your group. They're consistent, dependable, loyal, and focused on others. They do not like confrontation. They do enjoy stability and peace, and they are awesome listeners. So if personalities were dogs, we would say that the amiable would be the golden lab of personality types. As easygoing as they are, they're among the hardest people to sell because they're risk adverse, and they want to feel safe, to have your approval, and to be engaged with you. I have often found it very difficult to sell to amiables. They're pretty much the opposite of my style. If you're doing something that disturbs or bothers them, whatever that might be, they're not likely to listen to anything that you say. So it's even more important to ask and to listen well. They're good listeners. You need to be a good listener. So you also need to have a relationship with an amiable, or be prepared to begin one, because they also thrive on relationships. Don't push them and don't rush them, and take time to get to know them. They love being part of a tribe. So before they buy from you, they want to know you, they want to feel good about you, and they want to trust you. There's a story I like to tell of back when I was working for 3M Company and selling copiers. I had been promoted to a national sales position, so I got to call on larger companies. And I was calling on this steel company. And actually, the steel company was located right just a few miles from my hometown, even though I wasn't living in that town at the time. I made my first call on the guy who actually was a purchasing agent, but he was in charge of purchasing the copiers for the entire company. So it was a considerable account. So this is one of those occasions where you meet someone and you instantly know you don't like them, and the feeling was mutual, I could tell. And we just had a very difficult time. I was in and out of there pretty quickly. At the time, I would say that I was extremely driven, if would be the word, I guess. So I would be in that high D, the drivers, and I hadn't learned anything about relationship strategies, so I was just the typical driver, and he was the typical amiable, which is the exact opposite of my style, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in those quadrants. But anyways, I was calling on him, and I had to go see him at least once a month, and I figured I'd never sell him anything. So it was about the third time I was going to call on him. I decided to do something. Every time I would call on him, the first thing he would do, before I even got to say much more than hello, how are you, was he'd sit down at his desk, and this was back in the days when you could still smoke in your office, and he loved pipes. So he had a whole collection of pipes in his office, and he had tobacco there in a big jar, and he would pull out a pipe, and he would proceed to load up this pipe, and he would not say a word this whole time. He'd load up the pipe, and he'd get it going, and he'd tamp it down. And this is like a hobby to light up a pipe, and it would drive me crazy. It would absolutely drive me crazy. And I wanted to say something, and I probably did interrupt him the first couple of times and talk when he was actually filling his pipe up and by the time he was done, he usually, I would ask him a question and wait for an answer, and I could only wait so long, and I'd ask another question. We hated each other. So finally, like I said, this third time I decided to try something different. I happened to stop at a drugstore very close to his office. And at the time, I smoked cigarettes. Thankfully, not anymore. But back then I did. So I went in to buy some cigarettes. And here at the checkout cashier, there was a rack of pipes. And it may have even been a corncob pipe. I don't remember now. But it was, cheap pipes. So I thought, okay, let me try something here. So I said, I'll take one of these pipes. And I said, would you give me some tobacco? And they said, well, what kind? And I said, I have no idea. I remember the guy grabbed this, this folded pouch, and I think it was called amphora, and gave it to me. I said, fine, thanks. I put, we wore suits in those days. I put the tobacco in one pocket and the pipe in the other pocket, and I went down the street to call on. That man's name was Frank. So same thing, went in, said hello, how are you? He sits down, he starts pulling out his pipes. Well, just after he pulls out his pipe, I reach in my coat pocket and I pull out my pipe. Well, it was the first reaction I'd seen out of Frank. His eyes got so big, and he looked up and he said, oh, I didn't know you smoked a pipe. And I said, well, I haven't for long. And I said, I don't know much about it, but I just decided to try this tobacco, and I pulled out the tobacco. And he's like, oh, no, you don't want to smoke that. He said, that's junk. It's perfume. It's got, perfume in it. It's terrible. It tastes terrible. He says, here. He says, let me, he pulls out a jar. He says, I mix my own blend. I blend it. Well, for the next half hour, 45 minutes, he talked about pipes and pipe tobacco, and we sat there, and he smoked his pipe and I smoked mine. That was the beginning of a relationship. So I made an appointment. And for the next appointment, I came in, and same thing. We both lit up pipes, and we started smoking them. And he says, you know what? He says, it's almost lunchtime. He said, if you had lunch. He said, I said, no, I haven't. And he said, I had my wife make you a sandwich. I always just carry my lunch. I said, okay, great. So he pulled out a sandwich, and we sat there, and we had the sandwich and smoked the pipes, and we talked. And during that conversation, I found out that he was from my hometown. He knew my family. He happened to be in Okinawa at the same time my father was in Okinawa. He actually mentioned that. My father actually worked at that steel mill. He was a laborer in the steel mill, but I had never been able to tell him that. And at one point he said, by the way, he said, is your brother? And he asked me my brother's name. I said, yeah. He goes, he says he used to date my daughter. Now, I was worried then, but I had no idea. But he said, he's a great guy. He helped me put an air conditioner in one day. And so that was it. And you know what happened? Frank signed an order. He ended up changing all the copiers in that plant over the next couple of years to mine. And it was one of the largest accounts I had, and won me all kinds of sales honors. That's the story of Frank and what can happen if you adapt your styles. All I did was really change my style. I slowed down, and I treated Frank and communicated with Frank the way that he wanted to be communicated with, not the way that I wanted to do it. So how do you spot someone like a Frank? Well, their office will have pictures of family and friends. They'll often have inspirational photos or posters on the wall or the desk. You might feel like you're more in someone's home than in their office. Their motto might be better safe than sorry. They often will have plants, and they'll be taken care of. They dress usually casually and comfortably, sweaters. Frank always had a sweater of some sort. So, you have to take time to build a relationship with them. They'll want to think things over. They'll get irritated if you're impatient or insensitive. And that's what I did. I made Frank, very irritated by the way I behaved in the first few meetings. So be patient. They're slow to trust. They have to feel safe before they buy from you. They'll buy from you after you've written them off often. So take all the risk out of your sale or whatever it is you're proposing. Use 100% guarantees or, take care of them. Make sure that they know that there isn't any risk for them. They want to fit in with everybody else, so keep that in mind. Even though you might be the better option in a sales kind of situation, they will often do what their friends and or their team are doing. So, be prepared for that. They don't like change. They're the people who really don't like change. So it's hard to get them to change from a competitor they've been dealing with for a long time. And they'll ask a lot of questions just to cover all the bases. So again, tire kickers. Ask them what they like most about their job or what the most important functions of their job are. Build that relationship. Mirror their speech pattern, their speech pace. So if you're a fast talker and they're a slow talker, be a slow talker, because often they will definitely be a slower talker. All right, moving on to the last one, that DISC, the analytics of the world. So as I mentioned, the analytics are people like, let's see, who's a sports analytic here? Could be a Tiger Woods, but I think he's the driver. Maybe more like a Jack Nicklaus. So anyways, how do you sell to an analytic? They're unemotional. They are facts-oriented people. They like systematic approaches. They value things like details, numbers, and they're not impressed with stories or emotional pleas at all. So however, they do like white papers and case studies and anything that proves the point you're trying to make. Now, what analytics fear most is making a mistake. They don't want to make mistakes, and they listen to you making a mistake. Like I mentioned earlier, if you use terms like everyone or always, and they know that that's not likely true. So they have to know that the numbers and the facts and the information all have to add up. They're not impressed with the potential or possibilities or dreams. They want to see spreadsheets and see that everything will be done on time and within budget with low to no risk. You can build credibility with an analytic by knowing the pros and cons of any product, options, or suggestions you offer. So they know there's always an opposite. So knowing both sides of the story or both sides of whatever it is that you're trying to convince or sell is important. So your approach to them should be organized and scheduled. They also care about time. You can be direct with them, be straightforward, get to the point. They don't want to be your buddy. They don't want a relationship. Show them that whatever it is that you want to do will work, and verify that it does, since they like to gather and process data. Don't worry about giving them too much information. That's hard to do. But make sure the information you give them is relevant and factual, okay? Flowery brochures and flyers or, pretty videos and all that kind of stuff is not going to impress them. Neither is something that's rewarding and fun. So that's just how they are. So how do you spot an analytic? Well, my favorite analytic was a guy who was a CPA. He was actually the director of this firm. And his office, if you walked into it, well, first off, I just used to stand at the door and look inside. And what you'd see was this very plush carpet that didn't have a footstep in it. It looked like no one ever walked on it. I swear to God, I think he, as he walked out of the room, he wiped out the footprints. I used to claim that anyways, because most people, when they walked across it, left footprints. But the rest of the room was, first off, he didn't have a desk. He had a table, because a desk has a bunch of drawers, and that's just messy, and there's no reason to have that. You need to be organized. So he had a desk and he had a credenza, and on the credenza was 3 photos, always in the same place. On the desk were 3 number 2 pencils, all the same length and all perfectly sharpened. That was pretty much the office. Their office is strictly business functional, so there's no little frills or color unless someone else designed it for them. If their partner or spouse is a different style and maybe decided to do some design, you may see something different. There may be a certificate or diploma or some kind of qualifications testifying to their experience on the wall. That's so you may see a CPA, for instance, the CPA degree or his college degree. Time is important, so there's probably going to be at least 1 or 2 clocks in the room. That maybe not so much anymore, since everyone seems to have it. They can look at their cell phone for the time. You may see walls, they may have graphs and charts reference materials, those kinds of things. They like that. So they pay little attention to clothing other than to be functionally dressed. Brooks Brothers was their favorite for years, whatever the corporate uniform is. So, wingtips and Brooks Brothers. Any files or books or anything like that are all carefully arranged and are organized and they're functional, and it looks like a librarian came in and set the room up for them. So they're not risk takers. If you're going to sell to them, you're going to convince them. You're going to have to convince them that that whatever it is you're selling or trying to convince them to do is a sure thing. They often say no because they tend to overanalyze. So just give them the bottom line. Don't be disorganized. Again, like the director, approach them in a direct manner, matter of fact, no nonsense way, and don't exaggerate your claims. So they will write you off. Use facts. Don't use stories. Use case studies, complete with facts and proof. They're thorough, so prepared to give them examples, spreadsheets, etc. Very often they will ask for more types of information that will let them know that there's no risk. They have a real strong need to be right, so let them be right. Their greatest fear is making a mistake. And that's how you sell to analytics. So what I've tried to do in this podcast is give you what is usually an 8-hour workshop where we go through a lot of things, including perfectly defining your own style and actually working with other styles. We match up styles and put opposite styles together in the room and let them try to communicate with each other. And then we put same styles together and let's see what happens there. It's a fun workshop, but we only have less than an hour, so I'm trying to give you enough information for you to understand how important it is to learn how to execute the platinum rule and do unto others as they want done unto. If you'd like more information, please leave it in the comments and I will get back to you. Thank you very much for listening today.